Talking Industry, topical debate from the worlds of automation, manufacturing and engineering. Brought to you by DFA Manufacturing Media.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for attending this morning Talking Industry session on cybersecurity. My name's Ed Holden. I'm the editor of Hydraulics and Pneumatics, and I'll be chairing the event this morning. We're fortunate to have a panel of experts who will be able to talk about the technology involved in cybersecurity and how it can protect your companies from bad actors. So if it's okay, I'll first introduce the panel and then invite the panel to sit on their respective chairs. So first we have Dave Adamson of EACS. We have Anthony Green of Foxtech. We have Marcus Wuncher, or Wunsch, I think, isn't it? Sorry, I'll probably mispronounce your name. Wuncher. Oh, I got it right the first time. From Eaton Industries. Then we have Nick Lewis from ASOCS. And what I'd like to do straight away is just introduce invite Dave to give the initial presentation. The mic's live, so it's okay.
So, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Lovely. So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit today about EACS and what we do and how maybe it applies to some of what you guys do. So we're an IT service provider. So we provide managed services, professional services, consultancy services, really to all sorts of organisations. We've got quite a strong footprint in the manufacturing sector, and I'll talk about that a little bit more with my colleagues later on. But we've been going 25 years, we've got lots of different experience, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about how we might be able to apply some of the learnings from IT into a kind of more OT type context. I don't know if you're familiar with the 10 steps to cybersecurity as on the screen here. It's a government-backed initiative, so it comes from the National Cybersecurity Centre, which is part of GCHQ. And they provide the guidance for UK businesses, so it's kind of like the British standard for cybersecurity, if you like. And it's designed to give you a framework to operate against, so you can think about cybersecurity as it pertains to your organisation, whether that's kind of broader in the manufacturing sector with your back office teams, or indeed looking at the kind of OT side of it as well. It should all be applicable. You'll be pleased to know I'm not going to stand here and rattle through all 10 in the next 4 minutes. I just thought I'd pick out a couple of more pertinent ones to talk to you a little bit about today. So the first one I wanted to talk to you about was engagement in training specifically. It's oft said in the IT sector, and I think my colleagues on the stage will echo the sentiment, that people are the weakest link, really. You can put all of the systems and all of the technology that you need into place to try and protect yourselves against cyber threat. But if you don't invest in educating your people, then they can open the back door quite easily for anybody coming in. I know it's not manufacturing or industrial in nature, but perhaps you saw on the news yesterday, the Works, the discount bookshop chain, have currently had to stop trading because they've had a cyber attack, and that came about from somebody opening an email. They've clicked on the link in the email, it's encrypted the tills in the stores, and they're now no longer able to trade, and they're into incident recovery mode, more on which in a moment. I think when you're talking about training, it's important to keep a couple of things in mind. One is, if you're a senior leader or a senior figure in your organisation, you need to lead by example. If you're the one asking for exceptions because the too difficult light has come on, you're setting a bad example for your staff, and you're making it obvious for them that it's okay to ignore the cybersecurity standards that you're putting in place. So if you are that senior figure, if you're head of department, if you're a senior executive, I think it's really important that you show that kind of top-down commitment to security within an organisation. I think also when you're talking about training people, you need to make sure it's appealing to them. It's not everybody's cup of tea. I think we're a little bit different on the stage and being interested by some of this stuff, and for a lot of people it's just an annoyance that gets in the way. If you expect people to sit in a room for an hour, 2 hours at a time and be droned on at by people like me, it's not going to go in. So find solutions, find mechanisms that are digestible, that are bite-sized for people. We've got lots of people that we work with who have kind of on-demand video training, 5-minute chunks, mechanisms for interspersing that through their working day, so you can almost have people learning cybersecurity principles without them realising that they're learning, which is probably the best way to make it stick. The second piece I wanted to touch on quickly, was the data security piece. So coming back to that, that works piece. It just shows how important that data is. If you don't have access to your data, whether it's schematics, whether it's invoices in your finance departments, whatever it is, you can't run your business effectively. It's going to hit you in the pocket, and that's not where you want to be. Hardly a day goes by without a news article. We saw the works yesterday, but really, it's becoming front page news, particularly ransomware. I'm sure, hopefully, most of you have heard of that in the press. The encryption of your data by somebody nefarious and then asking you for some money in exchange for having your data back. The official advice is don't pay. You'll see different perspectives on that as you talk to people in the industry, but the best way to mitigate against a ransomware attack is to make sure that your data is protected in a fashion that means you can get it back. In boring IT world, we used to talk about the 3-2-1 rule, which we've now actually upgraded to the 3-2-1-1-0 rule, which is that you should keep 3 copies of your data. You should have at least 2 different media that you're storing that data on, so different media types. So maybe you've got some tapes, or you've got some cloud storage, or you've got something in the data center or the office location. Store at least one of those copies off-site, so that if a physical compromise happens in a location, you've got some protection mechanism. And store at least one of them offline, so particularly with that ransomware threat. If you've got data that's disconnected from a network that you're running, it's much, much harder for people to get access to it and to do something with it and hold you ransom. And the 0, which frankly is a bit of a stretch, is to make sure that you test your backups and make sure they come back with 0 errors. Because if you've got backups that you can't restore, they're not much use to you. The final area I was going to talk about was incident management, which I think is one of the most important elements. We have a phrase in IT which is assume breach. It's a matter of when, not if, that you will have some sort of cybersecurity incident. And it's important that you've got mechanisms in place to cope with that. Now, whether that's having a PR machine that kind of moves into gear, again, use that Works example from yesterday. Their PR department is currently managing the public image of their business, which is no longer able to trade. I think it's really important that you have a mechanism for getting out in front of an incident in the event it happens. Definitely the PR and marketing side of it, the kind of reputational damage, but also the training, coming back to the training point at the beginning, you need to make sure that your staff, your teams, know what to do, know what constitutes an incident they should report. Make sure that you've got a data protection officer in your business, so an individual who's accountable for deciding whether an incident needs to be reported to the ICO or not. If you don't have that figurehead, you need to have that figurehead, and you need to make sure that your staff know what the ground rules are about having a cybersecurity incident, reporting that security incident to the right people, and making sure that they don't just ignore something that happens, because it will come back to bite them in the long term. It's difficult to talk about security without kind of scaremongering a little bit. I am a techie at heart, so the hard sell doesn't come easy to me, so I won't do one. But I will say if there's anything that you'd like to discuss a bit further about your risk position, my colleague at the back of the room with the EACS t-shirt on has got some material on some USB sticks he can give you. Yes, that's a test. You probably shouldn't accept USB sticks from random people at a conference, ignoring the fact that I just took one from the AV guys to put this slide on the screen. But do as I say, not as I do. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to chatting with the rest of the panel.
Thanks very much, Dave. Would anyone like to put any questions to Dave, picking up on any points that he made within his 10 points? Yeah. Maybe some of the panel would like to pick up on some of the issues raised.
Yeah, I've got a question for you, Dave. Of those 10 steps, is there a particular area that you find businesses fall down most frequently when you come and visit them and work with them?
Particularly in the manufacturing sector, the asset management and the vulnerability management piece. We come across an awful lot of shop floors that have got technology going back 10, 20, 30 years, running industrial control machines, those sorts of things. There is technology out there that will let you pick up that software, put it inside some kind of security bubble, and make sure it continues to work. So don't think that just because you've got something that the manufacturer no longer supports anymore that you can't do anything with it to improve your security position. You absolutely can, and I'm sure that's technology that you guys are helping your customers with as well. I think that's probably the big area for us in manufacturing.
Any other points, gentlemen, or any other points from the delegates? Andy.
I mean, the worst example is XP, isn't it? But I mean, is that still a problem? I think it's in the NHS, isn't it, still? But what about Windows 10? I mean, that's going to be disappearing quite soon as well.
It's funny you should say Windows XP, because there's a recent report from the Department of Culture, Media and Sport that showed it's still in the tens of percents of organisations in the UK that are running out of support versions of XP. And manufacturing and IoT, as we see around us here, is one of the prime areas where that happens, because these pieces of software are highly embedded in products, in control systems, in systems that are very hard to change. You can't just go and swap it out with the latest version of Windows. And so understanding the risk that poses to your organization, the techniques that you can use to sandbox that and limit the damage that it might cause elsewhere is really important. Windows 10 still got a few years left on it, but I've no doubt that in a few years' time, although the end of life date has been announced, it will seem like a surprise to many people, as it does every time Windows reaches an end of life.
Thanks, Anthony. Has anyone got any points they'd like to add with regard to how to make training sort of sexier? You know, I know Dave made some very interesting suggestions there. I just wondered if anyone else would like to add to that list, just to make it more palatable and more, because obviously it's such an important topic. People need to engage and feel comfortable with it and actually interested in it. So I just wondered what the best way to achieve that would be.
Yeah, I think at first it's important to give trainings which are really important for the people. So if you are a software developer, you need another training than if you are a secretary, for example. Yeah, and we got, for example, several trainings automatically in our Eton Industries University. That's an own intranet with lots of training, and there are several trainings which are taking really, even if you are a cybersecurity expert, 2 to 4 hours to complete for static code analysis, for example. And I got the feedback also from a lot of people from the software developer, because they are interested in software, they are interested in code standards. So that the training was good and that they had really a benefit of it. Yeah. And for the other ones, if you're talking about the secretary or the people who are sitting in the office generally, the training should be really quick, because you don't have to know so much as the secretary. Yeah, you should know, you should not open any link in an email, but you don't have to know cybersecurity standards, code standards, or anything else. So it's important to make the training related to the audience. Yeah.
I think what can be really helpful in training courses is having concrete examples that actually match up with what people do day to day. I mean, I'm a techie, so I'm interested in code, but when you present developers with an example of, look, if you wrote something like this, look, I can do an SQL injection, this is a way I can get all the data out. Sometimes developers go, oh, that's interesting, oh, I didn't know that, that's actually quite interesting. And when they can have a go, I think that really helps to drive it home. And I think the same applies for people doing their business roles. And they might not have realized what can be done.
Sure. No, thanks, Anthony. Would you like to give your presentation now, Anthony?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Then we can discuss your points.
So just to introduce myself, I'm Anthony Green. I'm the CTO of Foxtech. We're a cybersecurity company, so we're a cybersecurity consultancy. We go around companies providing advice and providing services to help secure their business. What I'd like to do is to expand on the 10 steps that we saw earlier, and to really get inside the mind of an attacker. I think it can be really helpful to understand the tactics, the techniques, and the procedures that attackers use to try and get into businesses. So let's put ourselves in the mind of an attacker. Let's say we're trying to get into an industrial control system. We want to take down a power grid. That sounds like it'll be fun. So we want to take down this power grid. What will our first steps be as an attacker? Step 1 in the Anthony guide to breaking into a power grid. Step 1 is going to be to do some reconnaissance. We need to find out about the power grid. We need to find out about the companies that run it. We need to understand the technologies that they use and the people that are in it. So there's loads of open source intelligence sources on the internet that you can use to do this. We can look up things on LinkedIn. We can scan their external IP addresses, and we can find out what their business looks like. So we've done that. We've got some names of some individuals in the organization. We've got the names of the people that work in the control center and their email addresses, and we've got the email addresses of some people that work in IT. Step 2 initial access. We need to somehow get into their system. Now, to start with, we don't necessarily mind where in this company's network we're going to get in. We just need to get an initial foothold. So, I'm going to ask a question. What do you think is a top route for getting into a company? If you're trying to get that initial foothold in, what do you think the first step might be? We haven't got 10 steps anymore. USB ports?
Email?
Email. Yeah. Great suggestion. We're going to use email. So we've got these people, we've got some people who've got email addresses. What we're going to do, we'll create a Excel document. We'll put a macro in that so that when they open the Excel document, it runs some code and installs a remote access Trojan. Now, we do this for a living, so we've got a remote access Trojan in our back pocket. We're going to use one called Black Energy. Once we send all these emails out, we send them to loads of people in the organization. Most will get thrown away, but we only need 1 or 2 people to pick up on the email and open the document. And they do. They open the document, the macro runs, and it's installed our remote access Trojan. The Trojan's on their desktop PC in the office and reporting into our command and control server. So we, as the attacker, we now have access to a PC in the office. We've got a couple of PCs, someone in a secretarial role, and someone in an admin role. Now, clearly, they haven't got access to the substation, so we're not yet going to be turning off any power. So our next step, step 3, is lateral movement. We need to get from those 2 PCs that we found, and we need to get to somewhere much more interesting. We are after the operational control system. We want to turn off some power breakers and cause some havoc. So now we're going to stealthily scan the network, remotely controlling these 2 PCs. We're going to scan the network. We'll capture the keystrokes of the people that are using the PCs that we've infected. We can then use those credentials to jump to other machines in the network. We can then find some vulnerabilities and jump from machine to machine. And eventually, after several weeks of exploring, we hit the jackpot. We find a machine from a person who works in IT, who's connected across from the corporate network, across through the only firewall rule into the operational network that's running the substations and the power grid. Our target, our victims, have done quite a good job. The 2 networks are pretty well isolated. However, there is that one path that they use to do their administration. And because we're on all of those machines, we've captured their password. We know what those IP addresses are, and we're controlling this remotely. So we've got in, we're in the corporate network, we're in the control system network. We can access those control PCs that are being used to control the substations. All that remains is for us to plan our attack. Now, we could just go and turn off some breakers, and that would cause some disruption for a few minutes until the operators in the control center notice and turn things back on again. But we want to inflict maximum damage, so we need to plan carefully. Step 1, we'll turn off the breakers. We'll also change the password on the machine and log them out, so then they won't be able to log back in again to turn them back on again. We can deploy some kill disk malware to start wiping machines. So this will mean that it'll cover our tracks a bit and make it much harder to start recovering. To make things even more difficult for the operators, we'll turn off the power to the operations center. We found the UPSs and we can turn those off remotely. So their operations center will get plunged into darkness. And to add insult to injury, we'll also do this a few days before Christmas when they're on skeleton staff, and we'll denial of service attack their help desk so that no customers can ring through to tell them what the problems are. So this is a typical nature of attack. This might be quite an advanced one with a lot of planning, but we've had that reconnaissance, that initial access, that lateral movement, and finally the final payload. Now this story might sound like fantasy. This might sound like something that might occur, but this was actually exactly what played out in Ukraine in 2015 in their power grid, and they lost power for several hours whilst they tried to recover. Quite a few hours. So what can we take away from this? I think the importance of following established frameworks like those 10 steps of cybersecurity to ensure that you've got all of the basics covered. The cybersecurity is hard, and even when you do it well, breaches do happen, and therefore the importance of monitoring so that you can detect those in those intermediate weeks before the final damage is done. So hopefully that's given a bit of an introduction to.
Yeah, that was really comprehensive. That was fantastic. Thanks, Anthony. That's great. Any points you'd like to pick up, Erin?
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Of course.
You mentioned that PCs are that's the prime focus of trying to get a malware or anything into the system. What about if you use a Mac where it's the actual security is supposedly more tough?
So what's interesting about the Macs versus Windows debate is, whilst Windows has got a reputation for perhaps being weaker, it's improved massively over the years. Now I'd say that between Windows 10 and Apple Macs, they're actually on a fairly similar footing. There is malware around that affects Macs. There are frequent updates to fix vulnerabilities in that as well.
I think there's a market share element to it as well. If you've got a Windows device, you're probably more vulnerable just because there's more return on investment for a cyber criminal because of the Windows penetration in the marketplace. So it's worth them developing the malware for the Windows ecosystem because it's dominant in the corporate environment. So historically, there wasn't as much interest in developing against attacking Mac systems. I think as Mac has become more prevalent in industry or in organizations, it's becoming a higher value target than it was historically. If you wind back 10 years, Macs were the preserve of the design guys in the corner, the 4 people over there who had the Macs and everyone else had a Windows machine. Nowadays, we've got customers running businesses top to bottom on Macs, so it's become a much more important topic for them to think about than it was before.
But are Macs a safer option, basically?
Sorry, I'm struggling to hear.
So are Macs a safer option? I mean, you're talking obviously about PCs, but if your organisation has Macs or you're monitoring on an iPad or on an iPhone, and you do click that spreadsheet, is that going to have the same effect as if you were clicking on an Android or a?
So I think when it comes to desktop operating systems like Macs and Windows, I think the real key takeaway is how they're configured and how they're managed. In a corporate setting, that is, the most important is understanding how they're being updated, how they're being patched, and how they're being secured. Because in either case, if they're not being well managed, you're going to have much higher levels of vulnerability and risk than if they're being well managed. And so in many organizations, what we find is that because there's often fewer Macs, we often see cases where the Windows equipment is really well managed because they're mostly a Windows estate, and the few people with Macs are really poorly managed because they're not doing so well. Of course, the same will be true in reverse. If you're a big design agency and everyone's using Macs and there's 3 people running Windows, then the Macs will be a much better option. However, what I will say about mobile phone operating systems is that kind of mobile phone revolution, the security inherent in Android, in iPhones, is a lot better than what you have in your typical desktop operating systems like Mac and Windows. And it is a lot harder to compromise those. And that's really reflected in the black market prices for vulnerabilities in things like Apple and iOS. A remote code execution that would allow you to open a Word document on an iPhone and compromise the device is extraordinarily expensive for an iPhone, but in Windows and Macs, there's ones of those being fixed every couple of months.
And what about if you and what about if you use a VPN to hide your IP address? Does that help or?
Sorry, I keep talking. Private networks will come up in a moment, but VPNs is an interesting one because I think in many cases the marketing that you see about VPNs is somewhat misleading. The VPNs you buy, you see advertised on YouTube, they're only really protecting your traffic between you and the VPN provider. So it helps you if you don't trust the networks that you're joining. So if you're here at a show, maybe you don't trust the Wi-Fi here because you think people are sniffing it. The VPN helps with that. But if you're sitting at home on your BT internet, is there any reason to really believe that BT are going to be sniffing your internet any more than NordVPN? Because effectively they have the same access. You're just trading your trust in BT with your trust in perhaps the VPN provider. Different if you're accessing corporate resources. It's a different story.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Anthony. So Marcus, yeah, it's all yours. If you want to take up your 5-minute slot.
Where is it? Did you upload it? Did you upload it or send a PDF? No? Okay, that's okay, because I sent it before. Okay, so it's not available. Okay, yeah, then I try to do it out of my head. Okay, so yeah, at first it was a very small slide deck, just 3 slides, but some topics on it. So I try to remember out of my head. Yeah, I'm Marcus Wincher, Engineering Manager for Process Methods, Tools, Functional Safety and Cybersecurity at Eaton. And yeah, my security area of expertise is more in the direction of products, product security, OT, not really the IT focus. Of course, we have this interfaces between OT and IT. I also had a slide for this on my slide deck. Yeah, at first, I want to show you Eaton is yeah, a worldwide active company. We're active in several sectors. Also, several of them are cybersecurity relevant, like aerospace, or also the space of machine building, which is then part of the automation business. And yeah, there is in the last years, there is a development. It's called the convergence of IT and OT. So that means in the past you had an IT system, classical PC, server system, database, and also a smartphone, but it's IT security, and usually those devices are not directly influencing physical processes in the world. So maybe indirectly, but not directly. And that is one of the main differences. Also, the lifetime of this device is much shorter than the one of the OT devices. So in IT, a laptop with 3 years is old. A PLC in a manufacturing site can live there 20 years. Yeah? So depending on the application. And then we have the OT, that's the operational technology, which is really the sensors, the actors, the PLCs. And this technology is influencing yeah, really the physical world. Your heater is really heating up water. A traffic light shows you a light, so really physical impact on via these devices. And yeah, as mentioned, they have a much longer lifetime. 10 years is minimum, but there are as well devices which are 20 or 30 years in use. And then we have the cyber-physical systems. That is a relatively new development. So that means we have a combination of mechanics, electronics, software, and information systems. For example, a highly connected conveyor belt would be an example. It is talking to the cloud, it has a lot of sensors, it has a lot of actors, and it's controlled by a SCADA or a PLC. And yeah, that is, now we are in the phase of the convergence. So this 3, especially IT and OT, are converging. So you cannot really differ now still between an OT and an IT device, because it's not so rarely today that you have a PLC, for example, directly connected to the cloud. So is this OT or is it IT? It is both. Yeah. So today, in today's manufacturing side, you usually have highly connected systems between IT, OT, and as well as cyber-physical systems, which is related to data centers, to office PCs, to PLCs, sensors, and even to the cloud or other intranet services. And also you have, but additionally a little bit complicating the topic, you have now the service layered approach In the past, you just had your network, you connected, and you could just access what was in this network accessible. But now you have services, and that means they are layering over and over in your complete manufacturing site. Depending on the interface of your device, you could access several services, which is completely independent from your network. Okay, yeah, and then the third slide, that was Eaton Cybersecurity, Eaton Secure Development Lifecycle. So I wanted to show there what Eaton does to prevent this in the devices. So at first we have a review, architecture review, technology review. We do a threat modeling. That means cybersecurity related risk assessment. And from this we derive the requirements. That is then the foundation to start the development of the product. And then also the implementing part itself is very important. So there are several aspects which have to be covered. For example, the static code analysis, which is very important there. That means you have flaws in your code which are potentially dangerous regarding cybersecurity. Also there's the dynamic application testing. That means we are trying automatically to penetrate devices with automated tools which are trying to do SQL injection or cross-site scripting or whatever. So they do a lot of stuff to enter automatically. Of course, there's a third vulnerability scan, very important. It's also nowadays we are in the world where we also have to take care that the open source software is correctly declared in the code. If not, you are liable as a company. So this tool checks this as well. And we also perform fuzz testing. That means we are really confronting the device with malformed messages, with really a lot of messages to simulate a DDoS attack, for example. And the device, it has to stay reliable and is not allowed to crash. And because that is one of the, besides the third-party vulnerabilities, the instability of the devices is very important, because you can have implemented several security features, but if you're not resistant against a DDoS attack and your device does not really act in the way as it should be and it was designed to be, then this security measures will not work. So it needs to be also very reliable. And then we have the verification test. In verification phase, after the implementing phase, we really verifying the requirements which were implemented, which we derived from the threat modeling. And we do also a manual penetration testing. That means cybersecurity experts of us really try to hack this device. So, and only if the device passes all these attacks, requirements, documents, it will get released. And the release, also in the release process, it's part as well that we have the vulnerability management plan, update strategy, because in cybersecurity area, you can have a new vulnerability from one day to another. Without a patching strategy, you have an issue. And of course, incident response management, which means we are observing several databases with our experts on our own, but we also got input from customers. And if we get aware of a new vulnerability, we start assessment and see what to do, how to mitigate it. Also for the legacy devices, it's very important. Sometimes we have devices which are 10 years old. You cannot really develop them in this fashion, because then you have to rewrite the code completely or to redesign because the hardware is not available. But at least you can think about what you can do. You can add a hardened documentation. You can maybe find another device which could be switched between the connection lines. So that there are ways also to secure legacy devices depending on the device. And that is the way Eaton works. Also, the cybersecurity, the secure development lifecycle is compliant to the world-leading industrial standards, UL 2900 and IEC 62443 for industrial automation business. That means we can relatively easy certify devices against leading industrial standards. So we think, we can do a lot of things for you in this area, we also have this cybersecurity service, which can even support you for trainings or something like this. Of course, training is also a very important aspect, but we also had this topic, so our people are, of course, also trained. But yeah, that's it. So yeah, so we are very confident that we are able to produce reliable and secure devices with our development life cycle. Thank you for listening.
Thanks very much, Marcus. Yeah, so would anyone like to pick up any points Marcus made regarding convergence, IT, OT, anything to do with legacy systems, anything from your own perspective within your own company?
I've got a question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, Anthony, absolutely.
Marcus, how have you found, presumably this sort of interconnectedness is a relatively new thing for control systems, and particularly connectivity to the internet and the wider world. How have you found it's been a bit of a culture shock maybe to those people who are used to working in closed systems where you don't really need to worry about attackers because you can't access it outside the building, to a world where actually these things can be accessed outside?
In some cases, yes, because we have now also the regulation area. We are getting laws now which really enforce product-related cybersecurity requirements. And if you are not able to follow such a development process, you will not be able to certify or even to sell devices in Europe without a certification regarding these regulations. A very prominent example is, for example, the Radio Equipment Directive. Yeah, so it's right, definitely. There are some companies which are really fighting against this development, that this is cybersecurity is getting really important also for the operational technology. But there are also another big companies, also competitors of us, which are taking it really seriously. And it's really important. You cannot ramp up a cybersecurity framework in your company in half a year. Yeah. So you need years, and also you need to be part of the standards. For example, I'm as well working as myself in the standardization for IEC 62443, for example. Also, I'm discussing with the European Commission the Radio Equipment Directive, because it's really important that the companies really take care and are interested in these standards and technologies. If not, they will really have an issue in the next 3 years. That is definitely, because they will not even to be allowed to sell their devices in Europe. And we saw this as well for the Radio Equipment Directive, for example. There were coming 60 requirements from the European Commission. So even the companies which are taking cybersecurity really seriously, we could reduce them to 30, yeah? But at least there are 30 left. And there's also another development in the standardization a little bit. So the standards are really evolving regarding this topic, regulation, standardization. And if you're a company which is not taking care of this, you will have an issue in the future.
Interesting. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Marcus. Okay, over to you, Nick. You got 5 minutes. Well, and the excess as required.
I'll try and use a little bit less even, but 2 questions before I start. Do we have any IT specialists, cybersecurity specialists in the audience? As expected. Second one is, does anyone know what private 5G is? Okay. So ASOX provides private 5G management specifically for Industry 4.0 and smart manufacturing. There are a lot of advantages, which obviously I'm a big fan of, with private 5G. But one of the key issues is around security, and I've come here specifically on the security aspects of private 5G, and give a little bit of a different perspective on the whole security level. So one of the biggest things that two convergences have happened over the last few years. The first one is moving from LTE, like 4G, to 5G. 5G is basically taking cellular network and turning it more into a software. That's all it is. So, I mean, I once saw an advert for aluminium foil, the foil, and it had underneath it a free hat in every box. I mean, the conspiracies are out there, but basically 5G is a software. That's what it does. It delivers network at lightning speeds. That's how it works. The second one is that the cloud computing has moved into the factory or into the premise. That's edge computing. So on the one side, you have the devices, which is your cameras, your robots, your AGVs, your drones, your AR goggles, and on the other side, you have the AI computation and everything you need to run in real time. And all of this is based on a 5G network, a private 5G network. Why do I insist on private 5G? Because what it means is that it doesn't belong to any carrier. There's no Vodafone, there's no O2 involved. The data never leaves the premise. From end to end, it remains strictly on premise. No packet core goes to the public, none of it goes out to an ISP. Everything is held in premise and it's siloed so that the manufacturing floor is never touched from the outside. I think siloing is something we kind of like skipped on a little bit here, but like one of the areas that private 5G figures on is that not only is, so if you have like a Wi-Fi and someone actually manages to get the key to the Wi-Fi, they can go and surf on your Wi-Fi. They can come in, they can watch Netflix, and if they're the first one on the Wi-Fi, that's what they get. They have your bandwidth. With 5G, with private 5G, you have to actually register every single device through its SIM card onto the network. So no one actually has access to that network other than those that have been authenticated. And each device is given its own authentication across. So how much bandwidth it can take, how much uplink it can have, and how much downlink it can have. Which comes to bring other advantages. For example, you don't need a camera to download anything. You need a camera to upload information. But that's not anything to do with the security side. When we talk about the security side, what we're talking about is that you have a closed loop where you are giving authorization to devices. The devices are speaking through the RAN, the radio access network, the software that we provide, and through to the edge for the computation. And all of it's done on premise and in a closed environment where you control every single part of that area. I think that basically, like, there are other areas like which are a bit more technical, like 3GPP protocols, which happen on mobile networks. Regarding on how those devices are allowed to communicate and how they're authenticated. But there's a firewall between the device and the network management system. There's a firewall between the network management system and the edge, and there's a firewall between the edge and the company data lake. So like, it's becoming more and more like strict as into how that information flows and where the danger can come in and where it can be stopped. The next level of security happens like even on a level where you have the controlling unit and the distributing unit within the software, where there's going to be firewalls between those two as well. But that's a different league, and that's hopefully coming this year as well. I'm sure there's lots of questions and probably like questions you didn't know, which ones to ask. It's all new technology, but I'm happy to take any questions. I think it'll be easier to answer questions than explain.
That's great, Nick. Thanks. Any questions for Nick regarding anything to do with 5G, edge computing? Yep, Andy.
Thanks. What I'm interested in is how you and Marcus might interlink in terms of an Eton installation and a private 5G network on the same premise. How would that work?
So I mean, basically, we provide the software that runs the network. Between us and the devices and us is a firewall, which I think you'd be interested in. We do with Palo Alto right now. And between us and the edge computing, there's another firewall, which again, I believe is you. And between the edge and the regular IT, is also you, right?
Yeah. So in generally, the security and the operating area, product area, is not really relying so much on firewalls. Yeah, you have, of course, you have networks to separate. You need network sections. You of course also have firewalls, but it's more the aspect that the device is able to encrypt on its own, that there are protocols are used which are not vulnerable. That is much more important than firewalls, because, for example, if you have an edge device in automation area, it will be directly connected, for example, via MQTT protocol with Vodafone. Yeah, so no firewall on this device. That is an edge device. It's really.
That's just not the case with our software, because basically it's on a private. The packet core never leaves the premise. It never leaves the private 5G. It never goes into the public domain.
Yeah, could be interesting in future, maybe really to have this look on this private 5G network. But for now, we are not really using it. Yeah, so it's not really the standard in the automation technology.
Do you guys do the site from VMware and Microsoft Azure to the network? When you're looking at basically if you're looking at the edge computing side, it's VMware or Microsoft Azure. And then from there's a connection to the main network, the company network.
I guess with all these systems, it's looking at all the different components that can make up your IT system and working out how best to meet all the different requirements. And I guess in some environments we might have that may be very isolated. It's possible to completely isolate the whole system and have it all on site in a private 5G network. Great way of making it difficult to connect from the outside world. I guess in other places, you know that you need that connectivity. You're a substation operator. You've got stuff all over the country. You might have private 5G in one area, but you may then rely on intersite links to secure things, or you need to make sure that your substation control systems are developed using a well-known methodology and the products have got the right certifications. I think cybersecurity is always a multifaceted bit, and you need defense in depth in all of the different areas. And I think these all form part of that overall puzzle.
Generally, today 5G is a relatively new technology. Private 5G is even another story. Usually we have 5G in our devices really to connect with the cloud or any outside systems. But if they are communicating in between, they are using other protocols.
Thanks, gentlemen. That's been really, really interesting. I mean, what's really hit home, I think, is just the fact that you're talking about cutting-edge security technology from various vantage points. This is ongoing development. I think this debate will be ongoing. So I think it's important that, well, hopefully, you've got benefits for your companies through listening to the panel. But I think it's important for you to continue the networking. To meet up with these guys. Get their contact details. Keep the debate going. Keep in contact. And just keep the sort of conversational loop going. So, it's been great. Thanks very much. And thanks for everyone for attending. Thank you.